First of all, thank you very much for to all the organizers for giving me a chance to talk about this topic, which is very close to my heart, and also the opportunity to do something to help or support our colleagues in the Ukraine. It's one of the reasons this topic for me is so close to my heart is that it provides people the opportunity to do something. And this is a small thing that I can do, so I hope it is in some way useful to you all. And thank you also again for the quick turnaround on translation, on all the great technical help. I mean, I know this was a big thing for you all to organize, and I think you're doing a fantastic job from my experience. So now I'm going to share my screen. Hopefully this will work. Yes? Wonderful. Okay, now I think I'm supposed to change something, because as long as everything's working, let me know. Oh, please don't be afraid of the cats. They don't bite. Well, yes, sometimes they do, but they're there to give us a little bit of sunshine in the morning, a little bit of energy and the feeling of comfort. So let's see, talking about community setting the rules of the game, we need to start with, what are the rules as they stand? And you've been talking about this from all kinds of different angles all week long. Clearly, we all believe, or at least other people in this room believe, that the current food system is unsustainable for many reasons. There's lots of scientific support for the fact that it is not contributing to helping the global climate crisis. And there are also continual concerns of health and safety, of quality and then transparency in the food chain on the part of consumers. On the part of producers, which I think we have many of them in this room, or many future ones, especially small producers are becoming increasingly unable to support themselves. And they have a lack of security, which also contributes to the lack of food security on the part of consumers. The existing safeguards, the rules of the game as they are, have been shown to be inadequate. Those of you who were able to see Professor Rins talk about the challenges of organic agriculture, heard him talk about this ecosystem perspective on agriculture that was very important in the beginnings of the organic agricultural movement, and to many practitioners is still important. But based on the rules of the game, there has been what some refer to as a conventionalization of organic agriculture, where instead of viewing the system as a whole, individual inputs are substituted out that fit standards that are tailor-made for the entire globe and don't necessarily meet local conditions. Quality standards are everywhere. We don't think about them until they fail. I can take a train from Munich, where I live, to Rome, and I never have to think about the millions of standards that are behind that train trip. All of the different rules that decide how big things are, how they fit together. Those standards are there to facilitate trade and commerce and movement. But they have impacts. Yeah, already stated, why do we need them? I mean, the most common standard we have is money. Money is a standard. It's a unit that says this is how we are going to value a product or a service. We're not very aware of how much standards affect us until we start thinking about them. In agriculture, originally the standards that were created were, yes, to facilitate trade and to make sure that the customer was getting what they wanted. So physical attributes such as weight and color and size and flavor and longevity and shelf life, these were the things that were most important at the beginning. But as these problems, social and environmental and economic problems in the food system have become more apparent, sustainability standards have become important. And these go beyond basic physical attributes of the product to include things such as social environmental aspects. These are things that you've been talking about this week with many presenters and amongst yourselves and in your projects. So what I'd like to challenge you all to do now, if you're willing to participate, is to go into your breakout rooms. I prepared a Miro board. I'll share the link in a moment. And I want you to think about, given all the input and all the discussion that you've had this week, what are the attributes of a sustainably produced tomato? What does that actually mean? Maybe in your own environment, but particularly in the projects that you're thinking about developing. What are the things that you need to think about? So I'm going to share now, if I can find the chat, the link. And I was told that I should, oh, wait, sorry, that's not the link. That I should inform you that when you click on this link, you will be asked to log in. But in reality, you can just click continue and you will be admitted to the board and be able to participate in it without logging in or creating an account. I think now that I will share the Miro screen. Now I know some of you are already in there working hard. That's great to see. I know that you have used this in some other presentations, but just a quick hint. If you just double click on these sticky notes, you can begin typing immediately in whatever you want to put in. That's the easy way to do it. You don't have to do anything else. That's why the sticky notes are there. Please feel free to delete them, move them around, cluster them, however you feel most comfortable. As I said, my plan was that you would go into your breakout sessions to do this so that you can communicate with each other about that. Are the breakout sessions available to the participants at the moment? I
think that maybe not to all participants. So for example, I cannot enter this as well as the previous one, but it's because of super strong security settings of my university.
You can't enter the Miro board or you can't enter the breakout room?
No, the breakout I can.
Okay. It looks like people are already working together. My plan was that we would work in 2 different breakout rooms. Sorry if I didn't make that clear. And I've created 2 different boards for the 2 different project groups. But in the interest of supporting community organized activities, if you all would rather prefer to work on one board, that's fine with me. I would say that we, if we're going to do that, then I would suggest that we open the discussion. Or can we send them into the breakout rooms?
The breakout rooms are open, so
Okay.
if they want to join, they can.
Okay. I would encourage you all to move into your breakout room so that you can discuss with your colleagues what you've already been talking to each other a lot about these projects and what you hope to achieve and how you hope to achieve them. Have you thought about what are the key aspects of sustainability that need to be included in those projects? And if you can consider that the tomato is the product of your projects, what are those key issues that are important? How can you name them? And feel free to please to write in Ukrainian. And those of you who are able, feel more comfortable in English could maybe help your colleagues translate their comments.
So maybe just like a little technical note. So we have 7 breakout rooms. Like my suggestion, if it's feasible for you, that we will use just 2 rooms. The one will be for everyone who is willing and is capable to speak in English, and the second for Ukrainian speaking students.
Okay,
And then we also need to know the end of this exercise. Then I will ask whenever you, Laura, tell that you or Sebastian close this room and we will be back to the main room.
okay. That's fine with me. I have set up the board based on the 2 active breakout sessions, so the 2 active groups. But we can ignore that and make the first one where most people are already active, the one for the Ukrainians. So those of you who can everybody at least see my screen of the Miro board? Stephanie cannot.
No, I can see, but maybe you need to switch the screen because now we are sharing 2 screens.
We are also having now 2 new breakout rooms. One is for English speaking people and one for the Ukrainian speaking.
Okay.
Just scroll down, please, to the bottom. It's under administrator. So everyone can join those rooms now.
Okay, I'm going to write Ukrainian here on where most people are active. And those of you who are English speakers, if you just see to the right, we have another board for English speakers. Steffi is moving over. Is it clear now?
Yeah, it's clear. Just like one technical note that once we go to breakout rooms, we will not be able to hear you anymore because you are in the main session.
Okay, that's fine, because the point of that is for them to discuss amongst themselves what does a sustainable tomato look like? What are the attributes? And to record that on these mural boards so that we can discuss it afterwards. I would say, given that not much writing has happened yet, I would say that we give them at least 10 minutes. So until 5 after, and then maybe I can go into the rooms and check in with them and see how they're doing. Okay? Sebastian? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. I am not able to see the breakout sessions now.
Okay. Please click on the breakout session button and then scroll down. Under administrator, under point 7, you can find the English speaking and the Ukrainian speaking.
Ah, here I go.
It's a little bit hidden. I'm sorry.
Okay. Okay, but nobody's in there.
But people are joining the Ukrainian speaking channel
Wonderful.
Already.
Wonderful. I'll go into the English speaking channel and see who's there. Maybe they need some support. Thank you.
Basti?
Yeah, bitte.
I think also Aya cannot join somehow, she said. Maybe you could assign her to the English room.
Of course.
Possible. Thank you.
Laura, just a short question. Do we still want to wait until 11:05 or do we want to give them some more time? Laura, you have to unmute yourself and switch to the English channel. Otherwise, we can't hear you.
I was just about to go into the breakout rooms and ask.
Okay.
But it might be better faster if an interpreter went into the Ukrainian room. I can do both, but I'll start with the English room.
Okay, but Laura, do we want to stick to 11:05? Give them 3 more minutes or a little bit more? 11:10 perhaps? I don't know.
Yeah, I think do you want to just write them a message to say that?
I can.
Okay.
So we stick to 11:10
Sorry.
then?
Yes,
Okay, that's okay. Wonderful.
yes. Okay. Okay. Yeah, Pablo is there. He's
Leave the booth, it might be a bit.
fine. No problem. No problem. What would be great is when we come back to discuss it together, if maybe one of you could take on the task of translating. If nobody in the room wants to be the translator, Pablo maybe, whatever, however you choose to decide that.
Laura, we are doing that. We are translating that. Probably we can paste then the translations under the sticky notes, and yeah, we will figure it out.
Okay. I trust you all know the way to do things.
Okay.
Hello?
Yes, we can hear you.
And I'm in the right session, right? The English session, or should I be in the original?
No, Laura, now the sessions have been closed now, so
Mhm.
everyone should come back to the main room, to the main session.
Mhm.
And you can see the translation in the mural boards for the Ukrainian mural board right beneath the sticky notes or under the sticky notes.
Wonderful.
Okay.
Great. But I'm in the right channel. I'm on the English channel.
You are speaking in the English channel, yeah. It's working.
Yes. Okay, good. And then I will share the mural board so that we can discuss it together.
So we did not manage to translate all our notes in English, but maybe the solution might be that I will read it aloud and our translator will translate it for the English channel.
Yes, wonderful. So I'm happy to see there's so much content here. And I guess the first thing I would like to ask in general is, was there disagreement? Would anyone from either of those groups like to give a comment on whether you had to discuss whether something was necessary or not to be sustainable? Good, thank you. From the Ukrainian side, was there debate?
No, I think that there was no much debates about that.
Why do you think that is?
Maybe because we were working individually, each person separately. Or there's a message in the chat because we are experts in this subject matter. And the message from another message in the chat is that we have shared values / philosophy.
Very good. That's what I was trying to get at. So you see, it's a lot easier to develop a set of standards for a particular product that we can all agree is sustainable in a group of very like-minded individuals who are all gathered together for a specific purpose, than it is to develop a general standard applicable across the whole world to support sustainability. So it really depends on who's at the table. I see in this group, we say GMO is not allowed. We need to use organic methods. There needs to be an equitable distribution system. I don't see anything here really about the original quality attributes according to food, interestingly enough. It still needs to taste good. There still needs to be the availability of products that we wish to have. Yeah, those things aren't necessarily here, but you can see all the different aspects that need to be addressed. And what standards do is they first take these sorts of aspects that are difficult to define, like an equitable distribution system. And those who are setting the standards have to decide, first of all, what does that mean? Second of all, how can we measure it? And then third of all, who enforces it? And this was something that came up again and again in the last presentation about how there are laws in place, there are rules in place, but if those laws and rules are not really implemented or controlled, then they're worthless. And behind every law and every standard and every rule, there's a set of values. No matter how much those rules and laws are presented to us as objective and scientific based on experts like us, we all have our value system behind what we do and what we think and how we think and what we think is important. I'd like to leave this here for a minute and go back to the standards discussion. Unless there's, I really would love to have more input from you all about that exercise. Did it make you think about things you hadn't thought about? Can you imagine what it would be like to be in the room with someone that doesn't necessarily think that organic agriculture is important? What is the role of technology? I don't see any comments here about that. Renewable energy, definitely. Information for the consumer, short supply chains. These are all things that need definitions based on local conditions. Yeah, here's something, basically tomatoes require a stable, warm climate, blah, blah, blah. So the question is, can you have a sustainable tomato in, I don't know, northern Germany in the winter time? These are questions that all are not necessarily answered by standards. I'm going to now go back to the presentation, unless anyone would like to make any comments about this before we go back.
There is one comment in chat.
Thank you. And doing one sustainable thing isn't enough. It needs to be supported by a sustainable system. Thank you. No, only seasonal tomatoes. This requires what? This requires a rethinking on behalf of consumers about what food means. Yeah. They've gotten all used to these supply chains that are now, in cases like the Ukraine and during the conflict, or in cases like the whole world during COVID, these supply chains began to break down. Again, based on the standards that are set up, the long supply chains that are complicated and not transparent, people started to ask more questions about whether this is sustainable. I don't see any more. Yes, it was interesting to think about how this one product is supported by a systemic web of interactions. That's the problem with sustainability. It's complex.
I'm sorry, Laura, are you showing now your slides? Because we don't see it.
No, I'm sorry. I know I said I was going to, but I am now going to start. Now?
Yes, now we see it. Yeah, now we see
Okay,
it.
thank you. So again, these standards in agriculture as we currently know it are based on the value judgment that internationalization of trade is good. And the standards, and I'll get into this a little bit more in the next slide, but those that set many of those standards at this time are part of the consolidated food retail monopoly that is really driving supply chains worldwide. And a part of a plethora of different actors who have tried to create their own private standard to support their ideas of what their product differentiation should be, based on ostensibly consumer demand and problems of sustainability. But the fact is, these standards, because of the internationalization of trade in food and agricultural products, are applied in a wide variety of environments that are very, very different socioeconomically, geographically, physiologically, climate-wise. This you're all aware of. In order to develop a system of standards that is seen as legitimate and scientifically based and objective, the third-party certification system has become the standard across the world. This applies even with government regulations such as organic legislation at the EU level and the US level, but also generally in other types of standards that are more privately based, like fair trade standards or other types of ethically based standards. Because of this system, because large actors tend to dominate the discussion, and because the systems are designed to fit worldwide and based on a set of principles that usually come from Western developed countries, this system has been increasingly criticized, that it is threatening to food security and food sovereignty, and that the supply chains that result are not socially sustainable or sustainable in terms of rural development. This was talked about yesterday in the short food supply chain discussion in Ghana, and you're experiencing it yourself in the Ukraine. What happens is that many producers get pushed out of the chain because it's too expensive or bureaucratic, it's difficult to understand. It also means that they're not adaptable. Again, this was discussed a lot by the colleague from Ghana yesterday about the lack of adaptability of these local supply chains, in terms of prices. And it becomes extremely confusing for consumers to understand. When I stand in the grocery store and I think about, oh, is this a short supply chain? Are these people being remunerated? How can I tell by looking at this set of products on the shelf? So this is one illustration of this current three-party system that dominates in the world. Adapted from Lecanto and Bush. Bush has written a lot about standards. If you're interested in this topic, I recommend that you look at him from a sociologist's perspective. These standards develop some of these things that you have here: input specifications. Can I use chemicals? Do I need to use products only from my own farm? What kind of labor can I use? Output specs, like things that we mostly didn't discuss: size, form, color, nutritional content, shelf life. But more importantly, how do we measure these things? Who determines what's sustainable? The people that sit at the table in these standard development organizations. Sorry, that's what the SDO stands for, Standard Development Organizations. These are increasingly consortiums of private actors, largely from retail giants, international retail giants. These standards set up also how these measurements need to be documented. They set up the rules of the game. Who gets to participate in the supply chain? But because these standards are international, they have to be implemented in many different countries by many different actors. So generally what has developed is a system of national accrediting bodies. These bodies are generally public or quasi-public, and they exist now in nearly every country. They tend to be non-sector specific. That means that one body is appointed by the government to decide who gets to monitor whether a standard is being adhered to or not. So here's another level of distance between the consumer and the producer. So these national attributing bodies, then their job is to certify certifiers that monitor whether the standard is being adhered to. So you see that the customer is putting trust first in the standard developer and the producer as well, because the producer is trying to get recognition for the types of actions that they are doing on the ground. As many producers produce sustainably because it's the way they wish to produce, not because they just want to make more money or because it's mandated from above. These national attributing bodies don't necessarily have expertise in those fields, in the fields of agriculture and food. They have to find accreditors in their country that they trust, and they decide who those are. And what makes it more complicated is that many of these national bodies have agreements with those bodies from other countries where they say, okay, if you in Ghana say that this accreditor is reliable, then we will accept their accreditation for this standard in our country. You can imagine how many opportunities this sets up for corruption, for places where there aren't experts, or for experts from one country to become the experts for another country where they don't necessarily have the appropriate knowledge. So what are the impacts of this system? What happens is, because this standard is applied all over the world, it, according to some authors, has minimized the interest in process criteria and local peculiarities. Some standards just don't fit in some places. But I'm required to do it, so either I do it or I fake it. They've also diminished the demand for variety, which you've talked about this in so many of these talks this week, how important diversity is, agro-diversity. And they tend to, and this is what has happened with the commercialization of organic agriculture, what they tend to do is limit biodiversity. That was also talked about by Professor Rins when he was talking about the different varieties of carrots. And this makes the system less resilient to pests, to diseases, and to climate change. But also equally as important, it separates producers from consumers. Consumers don't understand. And when you think about the array of complicated topics you've been talking about in the last week, it's understandable. It's difficult for us when we start to think about all of the things that we need to think about in terms of sustainability. And we know a lot about these processes, but consumers do not. And the label on the package does not contribute all of it, does not provide me with all that information that I need to know to understand why it might cost me more to have a sustainable tomato. This perfect substitutability, every supplier is the same. This is just not true. There are only particular suppliers that can fit into those particular standards, which ends up excluding many of them from the chain. So in reaction to this, and you've talked about some of these projects as well, and you're involved in some of these projects yourselves, alternative food networks have began to appear. And they take different forms depending on where they are and depending on the people who are involved in them. what their particular goals are, what their particular priorities are for sustainability of the agricultural products. These take many forms: retail food cooperatives, community gardens, you've talked about. Community supported agriculture was mentioned briefly in at least two of the talks that I heard. But this is a term that is often very simplistically discussed. The classical version of community supported agriculture is depicted here in a very American way, I have to admit. Here's the farmer, the consumer comes and says, hey, I want to support you. I give you money in advance and you grow your crops and I will be happy to take them. This is the simple model of consumer supported agriculture, which is discussed most in the literature and most people understand it. After spending several years deep in the community supported agricultural movement in Germany, I think there's a lot more to it. And I'd like to discuss that with you, what I think is important happening in that movement. The question I have now is, we had originally planned to have a break. Do the participants want to have a break? It's on the program that there's a break in my presentation. Should we take a break now? Or
we don't have, in fact, break in the program. So these two blocks goes together.
okay, so I should just continue.
Yeah.
Okay, wonderful. So I discovered when I was preparing myself for this that there was actually a CSA workshop in the Ukraine sponsored by you all, permaculture. So I guess I would like to take the opportunity here to see if any of those people who were maybe present in that conference have a different idea of what community supported agriculture can mean. Is it more than just consumers paying the farmer in advance? Was anybody here a participant in that? Or does anybody here have experience in the Ukraine with community supported agriculture? Not seeing any hands. Pablo?
I was organizer of this conference, so I would also be interested to hear the answer to your questions.
Now you have double pressure. Participants.
Well, I don't know, while people are thinking, I can just briefly say that we did discover some initiatives that are very close to community-supported agriculture, though it's not quite community-supported agriculture, but I presume that it is it can have different forms, so it's a kind of continuum from whatever, like market, like normal market distribution and CSA. Maybe later on Inna will present her view on that, and we established a number of regional and also topical groups for communications that did not become that active, but again, like my understanding and also what I observe in other countries, that it needs some institutional support, additional institutional support to launch. So we need to start some research or community projects to establish these initiatives after the conference.
I hope that happens. And I think now I tell you why. And continue with my presentation. I would encourage anyone who wants to make a comment at any time to please raise their hand or put it in the chat, and maybe the facilitators can help make sure that I notice it in the right time. So it's funny how that you say you identified many projects that were like community supported agriculture, not exactly. Again, this term is generally thrown around with that very simplistic model that I presented before. But there are community-supported agricultural initiatives that take different forms in different countries and have arisen at different times. I won't go into that in great detail, but there's definitely a lot of literature that you can look at how these different forms actually differ in different countries. And that's, again, back to the standardization problem. This is the strength of these sorts of initiatives. In Germany, there weren't initiatives that were calling themselves community-supported agriculture until the late 80s, early 90s. And in 2011, several of those organizations got together, those initiatives got together and met and decided that they wanted to form their own institutional support for these types of initiatives. So they created a network and they created a German term for community-supported agriculture, solidarische Landwirtschaft. And in this term is solidarity. I think this is a key component to think about in terms of the way it has developed in Germany, where it came from, and how this, in my opinion at least, differs from perhaps other similar systems in other parts of the world. At the time of the founding of the organization, there were less than 20 of these organizations. Now, what do we have? 11 years later, there are over 400 in existence and at least 100 in formation. These are only the ones that have identified themselves through the network of the Solidarity Agriculture initiatives. So there could be many more that take similar forms. These are the ones that have self-identified. The network itself formed to support, as I said, this concept, to consult, to help people understand how does this work, and to create networking opportunities between those people who are already participating. At the time of foundation, they legally protected their name and logo. But rather than set up standards or criteria, they just based it on a set of principles. And I won't go into those principles. I do have them translated. If anybody wants to see them, I can show them my translation. But they're very general and broad. And this is the key to, I believe, the success and the growth of this network. Because what it allows is it allows groups of people to come together and self-organize and create their own sets of rules. First of all, sit in the room and decide, okay, first of all, what do we want? Do we only want vegetables? Do we want to get all of our food from this farm? Is this farm capable? Do we know a farmer? All of these are based on the local situation of the people who were involved at the beginning of the conversation. Then those desires, those wishes can be adapted to the capacity and the needs of those agriculturalists that are already involved, or those consumers, if it's coming from the consumer side, can go out and find those agriculturists who meet their needs. So I've already covered. And again, adapted to local conditions. A Solavi that forms in Munich, where there are a lot of people with a lot of money and very little time, is going to be much different than a Solavi that forms, a Solidarische Landwirtschaft that forms in the middle of nowhere in a rural area of Germany. This is why the lack of standards is actually helpful. And also allows these structures to be quickly adaptable to changing conditions. These rules, again, can be based on who's there. This can be dangerous. They need to be more institutionalized but at the very beginning of these initiatives, you have to collect your skills, your knowledge, your resources and say, what do we have? How can we manage this based on who we are and where we are working? And who does the work? And one of the key difficult questions is, what work gets paid? This is how the traditional supply chain takes that question away from the consumer. They don't know who gets paid for what. All they know is what they pay at the end. They don't know how much of that money went to the producer. They don't know how much of it got siphoned off by this person who certified that, or this person who did the bookkeeping. Those are the kinds of things that consumers are not privy to, and they do not understand the complexities of producing and marketing an agricultural product. These community events are really important, and I'll talk about them more later. One thing that I did not mention, I'm sorry, I'll be using this term Solavi from now on. It is basically the term that is generally used in the movement and by most organizations, just because it runs off the tongue better than Solidarische Landwirtschaft. However, it's important to note that that term was not legally protected by the network. This is a map I created in 2019 that just gives you an idea. I don't know how well you can see that on your screens. Gives you an idea of how widely distributed these were already in 2019. At that time, there were 241 existing. Now there are over 400. You can see that is one of the main critiques of many of these alternative food movements, is that they cluster around cities where there's a lot of income but as you can see here, they are actually moving out into the much more rural areas of Germany, and they're popping up everywhere. I don't have, unfortunately, an updated map to help you see how it has gotten better. Thank you, Stephanie.
Thank you very much for your informative and interesting presentation.
I'm not finished.
Oh, okay. Sorry. I
That's
thought
okay.
when you said thank you, Stephanie, that you're done.
No, I saw your comment in the chat. I think I still have about half an hour time, do I not? Okay, good. I hope I get through it. So what really happens in these movements? It's not just the farmer and shaking hands with the consumer, giving his money and going. What really happens is these are very, very diverse arrangements that are set up by those who participate. They can be, this first instance here, the sole proprietor. So that's a farmer or a farm family that owns their land and has individual contracts with all of the consumers. This can be like that model that I showed you in the picture, where there's really not very much interaction between the consumers and the producers, but that depends on who's there. How communicative is that producer? How willing are they to bring people onto their land and let them participate in the production and the production decisions? This is where the rubber meets the road, as we say in English. This is where the interesting interactions can take place. Sometimes what happens is it starts out this way, or sometimes groups of consumers come together and they form some kind of legal form of their own. And I don't want to go too much into this because, of course, legal forms are different in different countries. And this has an impact on how CSA works worldwide. In Germany, there are a couple of legal forms that are often used by consumers that want to work together to support farmers or producers and to receive products that they find sustainable. One is the registered club of Verein, which can either work with an individual producer that's already existing, or sometimes they actually rent their own piece of land or even purchase their own piece of land and employ producers as employees of the organization. Sometimes these organizations are consumer-based and they just figure out how to make contracts with different producers to support the different needs that they have, the different products that they're interested in acquiring. I see the chat getting messages. Do I need to? Yeah.
No, there is only Stephanie's message on Solavi, so nothing more.
Okay. I think there's some, I'll get back to that comment. I got some direct messages. A third form, which is becoming even more popular, is a registered cooperative, the name of which in German is Genossenschaft. And this is a more formal arrangement where actually the consumer members and the producing members actually have shares sometimes in the farm operation, but in general in an organization where they can invest money. And no matter how much money they invest, each investor only has one vote. And if they choose to leave the organization, after a certain period of time, they can take their investment out. This is extremely important because it can allow consumers to actually finance the kinds of agricultural operations that they wish to support and have that money be secured, because this is a very regulated system within the German legal system. This has also implications because there are standards that need to be met in order to meet this particular legal form, and there are governing bodies that govern those standards. But even within these different legal forms, there is a wide variety within the German system. Some cooperatives actually either develop or purchase their own operation, and all the members are owners of that actual operation and have different roles. Some contract out with multiple suppliers. So the Genossenschaft itself, the cooperative, doesn't own any agricultural production. They only make contracts with other producers that provide them with their products. And even in some cases, there's mixed ownership, where an organization maybe owns parts of the means of production, finances additional machinery or growing houses, glass houses, I'm trying to think of the English term, different means of production that make it easier for the producer to provide the products that they seek. But this is where it's what's really important in these movements. What happens within these Solavis? So through this process of self-organization, they have those conversations again and again with each other, like you had in your brief breakout session. What does sustainability mean for us? Where can we make the trade-offs? We can't do everything at once, but this incremental way of moving forward, of having these discussions amongst the consumers and with the producers of what's feasible at the moment, where do we want to go, and how do we get there? The other thing is these working groups of members are extremely important in these Solavis, because as a farmer, a trained agriculturalist, you're all learning this, you don't necessarily get the kind of training you need to deal with group processes, with communication, with social media, with community management. And this is where what was discussed in the last session, I think, about the need for multidisciplinary action. This is multidisciplinarity in reality, because landscape architects are there, finance experts are there, tax authorities are in these communities, and they can provide the group with their services, their advice, and their energy. And they walk away with this feeling that they're contributing the skills that they developed over time, not just to this great big system that none of us can seem to move. They're able to provide the expertise and the knowledge that they gain through their life to their own food production and to support the community around them. This process, I think, was referred to also in other presentations that I heard, of transformational learning, empowerment. It's extremely important and hard to describe until you see it in action. The other thing that they are doing in these individual Solabis is that they are cooperating with other actors. And this is really important. This is an example of it's a club. It's not a Genossenschaft. This group of consumers got together in the middle of nowhere in a rural area of Germany, as rural as Germany gets, okay? And within a year, they had managed to rent land, hire a gardener, and get 220 members. And part of the reason they were able to do that was a local or mineral water company heard about what they were doing because they were using the media so well, because they had that expertise in their community. And they said, hey, we want to help. You're protecting the groundwater that we use to produce our product. We're going to give you, first of all, money to help you pay your land rent. And second of all, we're going to send our employees there to work so that they can experience this as well. Another really interesting case study is an existing Solavi near Leipzig. They've been in existence since 2012. They had transitioned in their legal form from being an individual ownership to a Genossenschaft that's owned by the members. They were so successful that the church had 32 hectares of land in the nearby, and they approached this group and said, please take our land and farm it in a solidarische Landwirtschaft. But this is interesting. The members said, no, we don't want to get that big. We like it this way. We can't do that. No. So what happened is actually one of the founding members and another went out and said, okay, we're going to take this on because we think it's important for this land to be used properly based on our idea of sustainability. And again, within a year and a half, they created such an infrastructure that they are now, I think, over 600 members. They're farming this 32 hectares of land and bringing in all kinds of innovations like solar greenhouses and all kinds of things. And as part of their business plan, they developed a cooperation with Consum Leipzig, which is a consumer cooperative there, where they are actually distributing their food in these consumer cooperatives in the city of Leipzig. So they're spreading their message in another way. Am I out of time? How am I doing?
I think that you still have 15 minutes.
Oh, good. Wonderful. So you can see what happens is that this expertise develops in small, and partly because of the nature of many people who take on these sorts of initiatives, they need a new challenge. They've reached the goal they wanted to reach, and then they think, but this can get bigger, this can get better. And they reach out to other actors in the area where they're working and expand it to a greater size. But I want to get back to the network, because the network is also extremely important, in my opinion. And it gets almost no recognition. If you read any articles, scientific articles that talk about Solavi, of which there are very few, by the way, the network is almost never even mentioned, although they coined the term. This network, of course, provides an internet presence. So it's the face of the movement of Solidarische Landwirtschaft in Germany. But equally as important is it is a knowledge repository. There is so much information there on that website for people who are interested. There are links to seminars, there are handbooks. This is also similar to some of the material that's provided by Urgency, the international organization that supported your Ukrainian CSA. This internet presence is important. It also allows Solavis to list themselves there. So people who are interested in joining a Solavi can just look up by their postcode, what's near me. Or if I'm interested in starting a Solavi, then I can find out who's near me that's doing it, so I can meet up with them. They also have a consulting team. This is where institutional support would be helpful, because these consultants all operate on individual. They get paid by the people who are in need of their consultancy. So public support for these consultants would be helpful. They also coordinate research. They try as much as they can to sort of protect Solavi participants, because it's becoming such an interesting research topic. There's a lot of research fatigue in such initiatives. People think, I don't have time to work with researchers. You know, you can come help me, and this is what I do. You can come work in the field with us if you want, and then I'll talk to you. But otherwise, I don't have time for this. They also do other things, but the most important thing I think that they provide are these network meetings. Part of the important part of these network meetings is the agenda is dynamically created on site by those that show up. Again, it's bottom-up organization. Of course, the framework is there. There's a place to sleep, there's food, but first of all, participants are asked to help. They're not served everything. They're asked to help in the kitchen, clean up with the food, prepare the rooms. There's a lot of participation required in being in these meetings, but the agendas are set up. There are generally a couple of speakers, but most of the content is open spaces. If you're not familiar with that concept, we can talk about it more. The other thing that is practiced more and more in these meetings is sociocracy, which is a different way of decision-making than we're used to, which is not based on consensus, but on consent. If you're not familiar with sociocracy, I would recommend that you look it up. But here is where people get inspired by others. They come and they hear the other stories of how they've overcome their difficulties. They share not only stories about how I better deal with this pest, which happens in other sorts of communities of practice in agriculture, but also how I deal with my members, or who deals with my members, or how did we structure this so that we can deal with this problem. But also what takes place here is the discussion about what Solavi actually means. So basically the standard gets continually debated in these circles, and sometimes quite heatedly, because different models exist. And those different models in Solavi are based also on the values of those who participate. And some of those particular Solavis are very much anti-establishment, anti-system, and some of them are very much along the lines of traditional business. And that creates some tension in the movement. But those discussions can take place on the ground in these meetings with those people. So in the end, what happens is, rather than shutting people out of the circle, they figure out ways to bring more and more people into the circle. And within the network, there are also working groups, as in individual Solabis, and those working groups are most generally self-organized. Just a couple that I found really important. One is that those Solabis that are organized as cooperatives have gotten together to create their own sort of community within the community. They did not, in the end, decide to create a new organization. But what they have done is created another internet presence for those who are interested in the Genossenschaftsmodel, the cooperative model in Solavi. This is so informative, unfortunately only in German, but they have provided profiles of each of the individual Genossenschaftliche Solavis in Germany, and it helps people see in a very user-friendly way what is the diversity, what is the potential for organizing your own CSA based on your needs and your individual situation using the Genossenschaftsmodel. But they also have ongoing discussions where they've set up their own infrastructure to also continue this discussion about what is our standard. They have a monthly online Stammtisch. This is a German word for, hey, we get together on a regular basis and sit down at the table and talk to each other. And they also have an online discussion forum using the Mattermost program. This kind of infrastructure is provided by them. And again, Pablo, as you stated, this is where institutional help could be helpful to support these kinds of communication platforms, these spaces that these different actors are opening for discussing with each other. Another very interesting development is in the area of Leipzig. There are 7 existing Solavis. Those 2 that I was talking about before, the existing one and the one that took over the church land, are in that area. They are extremely active and extremely political, and they've been in existence for many of them over 10 years. They have their own working group within the Food Council of the city of Leipzig. So they are interacting with one another, again, figuring out how can we cooperate with each other? How can we make sure that we're not competing with each other? How can we share resources? What kinds of other infrastructure can we set up to support our Solavis and also to promote the creation of new Solavis in the region? My argument is that what's really happening within the German solidarity movement, Solavi movement, is that they are creating a participatory guarantee system from the ground up. Participatory guarantee systems, if you're not familiar with them, are a system that's begun to crop up mostly in countries in the global south. They're an alternative to this third-party certification system. They are served to help smallholders to increase the value in local markets, not for export, mostly because these are not recognized in many governments as standards. IFOAM, however, does support them. And they have helped them become involved. It becomes recognized by many of the governments in the countries which they exist. They're based on active participation of consumers, producers, and experts like us in defining locally appropriate standards. The problem with these PGSs, according to the scientific research that's been done on them, is, I mean, there are positives and negatives. They can build networks where those do not exist, which is what the Solavi network basically did. They are difficult sometimes, however, to get consumers involved in the process because they don't understand what do I get out of it. They, of course, require substantial organization and communication skills and time and effort, resources that aren't necessarily there. And they're often highly dependent on outside leadership. And even in cases of really long-standing organizations like Le Nature Progrès in France, there was a PGS that was supported by government funds and it became very active, but when the government funds disappeared, the organization ceased to be as effective. And this is a fear expressed by many participants. So can organizations like the Solavi Network overcome the criticisms of PGS? I think they can. They need some help, but they're already doing it. They're organizing from the ground up using their existing networks. Consumers are already involved. They're already learning these organizational skills and communication skills in their individual Solavis and in the network. These discussions are already taking place in these different forums that I mentioned to you. And the participation is based on both commitment to the common cause and the individual benefit they get. Because when these people go to these Stammtische or these network meetings, they come away with more than they left with, or they wouldn't go. There have been many successful bottom-up solidarity efforts that many of us use all the time. Wikipedia is probably the most commonly known. Creative Commons we use to find images and all kinds of stuff that we don't have to pay for. And open source software movement has been making a lot of headway, that they still haven't changed the overall system. And co-working in hacker spaces, you probably all are familiar with these spaces in your own environment. This can work in agriculture too, and it is happening in the Solavi network. And I think that cooperation with organizations like Urgency, the international organization that supports this, but more conversation between these individual networks in individual countries could help spread these movements further. Thank you. That's all I have to say. I'll stop my screen sharing. You can say one more time bye to the kitties.
Okay, thank you. Sorry for interrupting you first, because you paused for a moment and I thought that you were done.
That's not a problem.
Yes, exactly. So thank you very much. It was really informative and interesting presentation. I would ask the people here to just ask the questions either in the chat or in the Google Doc, or just open your mic and ask them directly, please. So there's the doc where you can write your questions either in English or in Ukrainian, or just post them here in the chat.
So
Any questions?
maybe I can start at first. So now I posted the link to the event, this conference on community supported agriculture. If any of our Ukrainian participants is interested, then please go and check. And my question is, when we organized this conference, we tried to sell the idea of community-supported agriculture as something beneficial for the farmers, that he or she will have an upfront investment, help from volunteers, guaranteed market, and all this good, perfect, nice stuff. Like we realize that it's also a lot of negotiations and communications and possible conflicts, as I imagine that it's pretty difficult to discuss and to agree upon something with even 10 people, and if it's 100 people, it looks quite scary, I would say. What would you say? Like my question is, when we start this implementation of the system in Ukraine, what shall we do in order to avoid deterring people from the very idea of CSA at very beginning, when they have the first initial meeting and it will be different opinion or whatever, unorganized communication, and everyone will see that it's something, the idea is good, but it will just not work in the group. You told about sociocracy. I know this idea. I practice it in many groups, and this is my very subjective opinion. I think that it's not very applicable for Ukrainian people because we have another little bit different way of communicating. So what would you suggest our steps to smoothly launch CSA initiatives in Ukraine?
My experience, I think it's, first of all, it's really important that you recognize the cultural differences. And that's why I try not to get too specific about the way things are in individual SO lobbies, because I think it's really important to understand your own environment and figure out what will work. I think what I can tell you, and maybe this is a German phenomenon and you think it won't work in Ukraine, but what I have heard in countless, I've had countless interviews, I've been to every meeting of the SO lobby network since 2017. So I've heard a lot of these stories, and almost without exception, what happens is the people say, yeah, we started it. We had our first information meeting, 50 people showed up, 30 people signed up immediately. And from that point on, it just went on its own. So I really think that part of it is just having a really, I think, first of all, I don't think it should start from above. I think it has to be cultivated that groups of people form it themselves. And I think that the best thing to do is identify those people, which hopefully you have in your workshop, who are really interested in doing that. And once they have an authentic idea that comes across to other people will join it because they want it. If we want to go to marketing language, the demand is there, and especially I would imagine in the Ukraine at this point, because the farmers can't get their products out and the consumers can't get the products in. The conditions are perfect. You just have to find the right people to communicate that. And once a couple of operations are there and existing, sorry, I got distracted by the chat. Other people see them and hear their stories and are inspired and learn from them. So I really think the most important thing is, I think a lot of these people who are still very active in the movement and are branching it out and making it go further are the early movers in the movement. And those people have a particular mindset. They're entrepreneurial, if you want to use that word. They're innovative. They are ready to challenge the system. And those people need to be identified. And those people also have to have a certain charisma. They have to have the ability to convince people that their idea is going to work. And if you find those people, it will happen. I mean, the funny thing is, people say, ah, that will never work. I tell, of course, everybody I ever meet about SO lobby, and everybody says, sounds great. I'd be really interested, but it doesn't really work, does it? I mean, we don't believe it because we've been all so conditioned to believe in this homo economicus that everybody is only out for himself. Despite the fact that we experience every single day that that is not the case. We live in families, we have neighbors, we work in groups, we cooperate with each other all the time. We drive down the road on the correct side of the street, not just because we don't want to get pulled over by the policeman, but we don't want to hit the person coming the other way. We know as creatures that cooperation is essential to our survival. But we've been taught that humans don't want to cooperate with each other. And it's just not true. And if you give them the opportunity to cooperate around something that is so imperative to their survival, they figure out ways to make compromises, or some of them walk away.
Okay, so is there any other questions? I haven't seen anything that was posted in the doc.
I don't know if we're out of time, but
Yeah, I think that we are already 5 minutes behind our time.
Okay.
Yeah, so like
So
with
there
that,
is,
yeah, please go ahead.
yeah, if there is no any other questions, then we can just go and enjoy the lunch break.
Yeah, so I would
Okay.
like to thank just to wrap up this discussions that we recently have. So I think that it would be really important is those people like Xenia or other Ukrainian people who go to visit and learn from CSA farms in Germany and in other countries, that they will spread this idea and maybe they will become this impactful and skilled person to start CSA initiatives in their regions.